before you become self-aware, before you become conscious, even before your organs develop in the first trimester of pregnancy, you are that same entity, and that's the idea behind the substance view. And the other argument, which we use, was another argument that Cody Nelson used. It's the future of value argument formulated by Don Marquist, who is a pro-life atheist. And he says that what makes it wrong to kill us, it's not that it's habit forming, because that would only explain why someone would kill, but that wouldn't explain why killing itself is wrong. And it's not the effect that it has on other people, because that wouldn't explain why it would be wrong to kill hermits. So what makes killing us wrong is that you're robbing us of our future values, future of valuable experiences, such as getting married, having sex, eating good food, traveling the world, things like that. So you're robbing us of that future valuable experiences. And so the zygote, as a member of the human species, also has that future of value. And so if it's wrong to kill me because you're robbing me of all my future experiences, it's likewise wrong to kill the zygote because you're robbing the zygote of all of its future experiences as well. And so a third kind of argument we can point to, because a lot of pro-choice people will try and argue that it's not really a person, it's not valuable because it's not a person. And I think they're mistaken on this, because they'll try to point to some qualities that make us a person, for example, consciousness or self-awareness. But the problem with that is, if we require consciousness or self-awareness to make us a person, then that would lead to what we call the episodic problem, where personhood would come and go. We'd lose personhood whenever we whenever we stop being self-aware, we stop being conscious. For example, if we fall asleep or go under general anesthesia before surgery. So what accounts for our continuing value, even when we lose consciousness and self-awareness, etc., is not that we have the present ability to exercise these states, but it's our inherent ability to exercise these states, which the human zygote has just by virtue of the kind of being that it is. It is a human being, and so it is a kind of entity that is a rational and moral entity. It just has to develop it. And so if left alone to develop normally, it will develop these things. And just as you can be a human being and lack a property of human beings, for example, you don't cease to become a human if you lose your legs in an accident, even though human beings are the kind of beings that have legs. You don't fail to become a person, even if you fail to develop these capacities. And that's basically what I would say.
Okay, I tell you what I'm going to do, Brett Strong. I'm going to just give you my, just like I did with Cody Nelson. Okay. I'm going to just give you my opening statement, and then we'll just take it from there. Opening statement, okay. And then we'll debate your 3 or 4 points you just brought up. So I'll just give my opening statement, and then we'll come back to your points, and we'll just debate those, and we'll finish it like that. Okay, cool?
Yeah, that's cool.
Okay, once again, Brett Strong. The zygote is not a human being. It's not a human, and it's not a person. These are the reasons why the zygote is not a human being or person. The zygote, first of all, is just a single cell. It's when the egg and the sperm come together and create a new being. It's called the zygote. It's just a cell with information. All the information of a human being, but it's just a cell, a single cell with information. How can one call a cell a human being or a person? That to me is odd. It's just a cell. This zygote has no brain, no heart, no lungs, no liver, no organs whatsoever. The zygote has no blood, no veins, no bones, no skin, no anything. It's just a cell with information. So how can something that has no brain, no heart, no lungs, no liver, no organs, no blood, no veins, no arteries, no bones, no skin, how can you call that a human being or a person in any facet? To me, the Christian just has to be dogmatic because he's a Christian. Speaking about Christians, I'm sure there's some atheists, but speaking about a Christian, since I'm debating you're a Christian, I just don't see how you can call a single cell with no organs or skin or blood or anything a human being. Let me make a clear example, like I made with Cody Nelson. A wheel with a blueprint is not a car. A brick with a blueprint is not a house. Even if you took all the parts of a car and piled them up, it's still not a car. It's just a piled up parts. But it's not a car. The parts have to be assembled first before it's a car. Same thing with a house. We could take all the parts of a house and put it in one scrap pile. That scrap pile is not a house. It's just a scrap pile of pieces of a home. Now, one must put the scrap parts together and make it into a home. Just like the zygote. The zygote is not a human being. The zygote must build itself up, adding brain, heart, lungs, liver, organs, adding blood, adding veins and all that. It must build itself up. And at a certain point within the mother's womb, it's debatable, but at a certain point, then I would concede, like, okay, it is a human being, it is a person. Somewhere in the fetus stage, I would concede it 100%, like, yeah, it's a human, it is a person. But like I said, in the zygote stage, it's not a human being. Like Clinton Wilcox, if you stayed a zygote, you would have no worth to yourself, you would have no worth to your parents, you would have no worth to society if you stayed a zygote. Any one of us, if any human being stayed a zygote, we would have no worth. No worth whatsoever. So to call a zygote a human being, to me, is rather odd, being that it's just a cell with information. And just like we would not call a wheel with a blueprint a car, nor a brick with a blueprint a home, then we should not call a zygote, a cell with information, a human being. It's just what it is. It's just a cell with information. It must build itself up. And at some point, it is a human, it is a person. Just like a car, a home, must be built up, and at some point you would say, okay, that's a car now. Okay, that's a house now. The zygote does not escape what the car and the house has to go through to become what it is. And that's my beginning statement on the zygote. It's not a human being. It's not a person. Therefore, it has no intrinsic worth, has no value, has no substance outside of being what it is. Now, Clinton Wilcox, we'll just take it from there and go through your points, or bring up any argument you want against it, and we'll take it there, and then we'll end it with that. So bring up your points, and we'll take it piece by piece really quick.
Okay. Did you want me to rehash the point I made in the first argument, or did you want me to go over the points you just made?
No, go. Do as you please. Whatever you want to do. Whatever pleases you. That's fine. I can take it any way you bring it up. So whatever you want to do.
Okay. Well, I'll just reiterate that I had a few arguments that I brought up before that you haven't addressed, but that's understandable. You wanted to...
Okay.
Addressing mine.
Okay, not to cut you off. Let's address your points. You want to address it? Let's hit your points. Put them in a nutshell, and I will come back with them.
Okay, because I was about to address your points if you want to go there, or if you want to go to mine, either way.
Okay. I'll let you take over, and we'll go from there. Go ahead.
Okay. Let's see. Okay. Your first point that you brought up was that the zygote is just a single cell. And how is it that just because the zygote is a single cell, that doesn't make it a person? What is it about being a single cell that makes it not a person?
It's just a cell with information. I mean, think about it. Once again, the zygote has no brain, no heart, no lungs, no liver, no blood. It doesn't have. It's just a cell with information. I mean, if you Clinton Wilcox stayed a zygote, you would have no one would call you a person if you stayed a zygote. It's like this: when a person dies, they get cremated, right? The cremated part, the dust. No one calls the dust a human being, even though it has all the bases of the person that just died. But anyone would see the cremated leftover, they would say, yeah, that's dust. It was a human being, but it's not a human being anymore. It's dust. Just like a cremated person is just dust and not a human being, the zygote is not a human being, it's just a cell.
Okay, I think your analogy is disanalogous, though. It doesn't speak to what a human being is, because you're destroying a human being that was formed, whereas a zygote is just a human being at an early stage of its development. And so it seems that you're kind of confusing what the zygote is, because we all had to begin somewhere. We don't, the egg doesn't get fertilized with the sperm, and then we just suddenly appear as fully formed human beings. So we had to begin as a single cell, which divides and divides and divides, and eventually we end up as we are right now. I mean, fundamentally, I'm just millions of cells with information, but that doesn't mean that I myself am a cell or am those millions of cells with information. So just saying that the zygote begins as a single cell doesn't mean that it's not valuable and that it's not a human person, because that's just how it begins life. That's how we all began life. We all once were that zygote. And so your argument that if we stayed a zygote we'd be worthless to society doesn't really work either, because if we all stayed toddlers we'd be worthless to society. And so zygote, embryo, fetus, newborn, toddler, adolescent, youth, etc. These are all just stages of development on the path of human development.
But okay, but not to cut you off. But when you said newborn, children, teenager, adult, they all have brains. They all have hearts. They all have organs. They have blood. They have skin. They have bones. They have cartilage. The zygote has none of that. Everything you just named, the zygote has absolutely none of that. None. So to compare a zygote to a newborn baby is like apples and oranges. Newborn baby has a billion trillion things that the zygote does not have. Period. We can both agree that the baby has trillions and trillions of things that the zygote does not have at that stage. It doesn't. So to compare the zygote to a baby is, to me, fallacious. Because, like I said, go ahead.
Well, it's not fallacious. It depends on what comparison you're making. Because I'm just making comparisons as far as stages of development in human development. So a zygote is like a newborn in that it's a stage of development. I'm not saying that the zygote is functionally like a newborn. And so I'm just comparing stages of development here.
But it doesn't have any of the parts of the baby. Nothing. It has 0 parts of the baby of a newborn baby. A newborn baby has brain, heart, lungs, liver, blood, bone, skin. The zygote has none of that. Nothing at all. Like there's apples and oranges.
I wouldn't exactly say nothing at all. I mean, the zygote begins as a single cell, and the baby has, many more cells, the same kinds of cells that the zygote had. So the zygote does have cells in common with the newborn baby, and it has the same DNA that the newborn baby has.
But it doesn't have the organs, though.
Because it's been allowed to survive longer.
But it doesn't have organs. It doesn't. The zygote. Go ahead.
Okay, so no, it doesn't have the organs. But what is it about the organs that bestows value on us?
Oh, perfect. Like I did with Cody Nelson. If a baby was born with no brain, which happens, a baby is born with no brain, ultimately it has no value. It's gonna die within a couple of days, weeks. A baby with no brain. Even if I had a child with no brain, I would have to say, well, as a human being, it has no value because it doesn't have a brain. You can love it to death, but reality says it's got to go. I mean, it can't do anything in life. It can't think. It can't. You have to have certain things before you are valuable. Like a car. A car has to have certain things before it is valuable and viable. A house has to have certain things before it's valuable and viable. And we humans don't escape that. We have to have some things before we are valuable and viable. And reality shows us that hey, if you don't have a brain, reality says that you are not valuable or viable, and when you die within a few days or weeks, that will show you, you can't live without no brain. I mean, you're not a person. That's a different. You have to have certain things to be something. Just like a car, a house, human beings do not escape the fact that they have to have certain things before they are a human being.
Okay, so let me ask you this then. So let's leave the brain discussion for a bit, and let's start with something a little less extreme. What if a baby was born without a kidney and desperately needs a kidney transplant? Would we say that the baby is valuable, or that it's not valuable because it's lacking an organ that human beings have?
The baby would be valuable, absolutely, because kidney transplant, dialysis. There's things that we can do that can overcome it. But when there's things that happen to the child that we can't overcome, then we can't overcome, and then the child will die within days or weeks, or if not hours. But brain is a big one. Okay. Brain is very important.
Okay. So it's not necessarily not having the organs then that doesn't make it valuable. It's not having a vital organ like a brain that needs for survival then, basically.
Well, no, because if you have a brain, but if you don't have a heart, lungs, liver, no blood, no arteries, no bone, no skin, then the brain, you have to have a number of number of whatever the species is in order to become valuable. At what number, I do not know. But let me take it back to the car. if you have a vehicle with, you know, 4 wheels and a frame and an axle with no engine, that car has no value. Same thing with a home. If you just have a basement built with bricks with no flooring, no frame, that house is not valuable. It's not even a home, and the car's not even a car. So we humans do not escape that. If we don't have a certain amount of organs, and we can debate that, but if you don't have a certain amount of organs, you are not valuable, and you know, you're not going to live. Reality says you're not worth the time, and you will die. So as humans, we need to have a certain amount of vital organs, just like a car and a house have to have certain vital things before one can even consider it what it is, house or home or human.
Okay. Now, it seems to me that you're actually confusing types of value. There's instrumental value, which means that something is valuable as a means to an end. For example, money is instrumentally valuable because it can purchase things. Then there's intrinsic value, which says that something is valuable as an end to itself. For example, happiness is intrinsically valuable. You don't use it to get you something, but it's valuable in and of itself. And so the difference between a car and a house and a human being is that cars and houses are instrumentally valuable. The only value that cars and houses have that we place on them are the value that we bestow on them. So, you know, for example, to the regular car owner who's looking for a car to get them from point A to point B, will only be satisfied with a full car, one that runs and can get them places. But, for example, a collector of sports cars doesn't really care whether it runs or not. It just cares, you know, he just cares about how it looks and are all the parts there. And then, you know, there's someone like Pick a Part who really doesn't even care what the car looks like. They just want the parts so that they can, you know, sell them to other people. So these things are just instrumentally valuable. And so the amount of parts that they have really doesn't really determine its value because different people place different kinds of value on it. But the difference between that and humans is that humans are intrinsically valuable. There's nothing about our appearance or about what we have that makes us valuable. We just are valuable as the kinds of beings that we are, which is rational moral agents. It's the beings with the inherent nature as rational moral agents. And so you can't really compare human beings with cars and houses. You can't even really compare them with blueprints because a blueprint doesn't become a house. A blueprint is just kind of a map that helps you build a house or build a car or what have you. And the zygote, so in the case of the zygote, a more comparable to the blueprint would actually be the zygote's DNA, because the DNA is you know, the information that it reads in order for the zygote to develop into a more mature version of itself. So, so you can't really compare the zygote to a blueprint either.
Well, okay. What I said when I made that opening statement, I said blueprint, but I also added another point just because I knew you would say that, like, well, a blueprint, you know, I knew you would come back with that. That's why I also added that even if you took a car, a total car, put it in pieces, right? So you got the car broken down in pieces. Those pieces are not a car. So you would have the whole car, but not a car. So you would have all the parts of a car, but it's still not a car until you put those pieces together. Same thing with a home, what I said in my opening statement. You can have all the pieces of a home piled up in the front yard, but until you put those pieces together, it's not a home. And it's the same thing with the zygote. You can have all the information within the zygote, but until that zygote puts itself together and puts organs and all that stuff together, it's still a zygote and not a human being. So my point stands, and it works perfectly when I say that even if you took a house apart and put it in pieces in front of your yard, that no one would say all the parts of a house piled in front of a yard is a home. No one. You would not say the same thing either. You would look at it and go, yeah, that's piled. That used to be a home. It's piled up now. And you can make it back into your home if you put it back together. A zygote too must put itself together. See, a home, we put it together from the outside. The zygote puts it together from the inside. But they're both equally as far as they must be put together. And at a certain point, like the car and the home, it becomes a human, it becomes a car, it becomes a house. So I think my point stands and works perfectly in my analogy that they're all in the same equation as far as they must be built up to a certain point before one says it's a house, a car, or human.
Okay, I actually don't think your point holds up, and here's why. Because Richard Stiff is a pro-life philosopher, and I think Cody actually brought this up too, but he essentially says that people tend to mistake human development. They think of it more like in a car than an assembly line. I mean, when do you have a car? Is it when you put the tires down, tires on the car? Is it when you put the general frame down? Is it a car when it starts running? Different people have different opinions on that. When does it actually become a car? But a zygote is different. As you indicated, it develops itself from within. We don't put parts on it to make a zygote. It develops all of its parts from within, directed by its blueprint, its DNA. And so Stiff actually uses the example. Suppose you're out on Loch Ness with your friend. You're in a boat, and suddenly out of the water comes Nessie, the Loch Ness monster, and you motion to your friend, "Hey, hand me my camera." And he hands you, one of those old Polaroid cameras that, like, the picture comes out a little slot, and it like develops in front of you. And so you take the picture of Nessie, and it dives back in the water, never to be seen again. The picture comes out, and your friend, who only sees a brown smudge, says, "Oh, bummer, dude, your picture didn't come out." And so he rips it up and throws it in the water. Well, you would justifiably be upset. You'd want to throttle your friend. He just tore up my picture of the Loch Ness Monster. And your friend would say, "Well, that's not the Loch Ness Monster, it's just a brown smudge." But the problem is, it was the Loch Ness Monster. You just couldn't see it yet. It hadn't fully developed. And it's similar to the zygote. The zygote doesn't construct itself like a car in an assembly line. A zygote develops itself from within.
Okay, let's attack that picture since it's fresh in my mind. The picture of the Loch Ness Monster. See, that fails tremendously because the picture has the whole Loch Ness Monster. Whether you can see it or not, whether it's like blurry or whatever, it's still the whole Loch Ness Monster. Okay, nothing's added, nothing's taken away. You take a picture of the Loch Ness Monster, because I heard Stephanie Gray use that same point. Like, hey, if you took a picture of a Loch Ness Monster, well, the Loch Ness Monster, if you took a picture, it is whole and complete. The zygote is not whole and complete. The zygote is just a cell with information. You see the difference? That's why that point that Stephanie Gray likes to use does not work, and it fails 100% because the Loch Ness Monster, when you take a picture of it, it's still complete. And when you take a photo of it, that photo is still complete. You take a picture of a zygote, but if you take a picture of a zygote, it's still just a cell with information. It doesn't have anything. It doesn't have a brain, a heart, lungs, liver, organs, blood. It doesn't have anything. But the Loch Ness Monster, when you take a picture of that, it has it all. The zygote does not, so that's why the picture thing fails.
Let me ask you this. Have you ever actually seen a Polaroid camera? Have you actually ever seen someone take a picture with it and seen the picture that develops?
Those are very ancient, so I can't remember the last time I saw I can't remember the last time I saw a Polaroid.
Yeah, so it might help if you'd actually ever seen a Polaroid, but you're actually kind of missing the point of the analogy, is that it's not the full Loch Ness Monster. The picture actually has to develop from a little brown smudge in the middle. It develops into a picture of the Loch Ness Monster. So it's not the Loch Ness Monster we're comparing it to. We're comparing the zygote to the Polaroid picture. It has to develop from that little brown smudge.
No.
Similarly, the zygote has to develop itself from within. You seem to be confusing what the zygote has with what the zygote is. The zygote has a single cell. It begins as a single cell, which divides and develops into a more mature version of itself. But the zygote is not that cell. The zygote is a unified human organism that's directing itself from within into a more mature version of itself.
Oh, absolutely. I am not confused. I understand that 100%. That the zygote has all the information of the human being. But so I'm not confused on that point, because the point is that with all the information of a zygote, all the human information, this stands that you cannot deny. The zygote is still a cell. It's still a single cell with information. That when you boil it down, that's what the zygote is. Like I said, it's not a human being. It's not a person. It's just a cell with information. When you boil it all down, it's just a cell with information.
Let's see, it's not a cell with information. It has a cell with information. Like an amoeba, it's a single-celled organism. Although, unlike an amoeba, it's the differences that matter. It develops itself into a monitor version of itself. So
yep, I understand that. Yep.
That cell is not the zygote. The zygote is not a cell like your regular skin cells. If you go get your hair cut at a barber,
yeah, I understand that.
Committing mass homicide. It's functionally different, and it's ontologically different. It's an actual organism that's developing itself into a more mature version of itself.
Oh, absolutely. I understand that. I say it to make it very simple to understand. When I say cell with information, I say that to make it easy because people don't understand too much complicated things. So I like to keep it very simple. And ultimately, that's what it is. It's a cell that divides. It divides until it's called plastocyst. And it keeps dividing until it starts to form organs. But it is a cell that divides because a zygote divides to 2, then the 4, then the 8, then the 16, right? 34. 32, 64. So it's still a cell, and you can prove it's a cell because the cell divides. Like you, Cody, I keep calling you Cody, you, Clinton Wilcox, you don't divide. You don't wake up in the morning, split in half. But this is the difference that I'm showing you right now of the zygote versus a human being, a person. Is that Clinton Wilcox, when you wake up tomorrow, you will not be divided in half and have an equal one of you, or divided. A zygote divides in half. And if you wake up the day after that, you don't divide again in the 4s, and the 8s, and the 16s, and the 32s, and the 64s. You don't divide, but the zygote divides. So how can you call the zygote a human being or person when the zygote divides in half, divides again, you never divide because you are whole now. And the zygote must come to a place where it is whole. And we can debate about that.
See, I still think you're mistaken about what the zygote is. You're not simplifying it. You're mistaking it completely because the zygote doesn't divide. It cells do. The zygote is not that single cell. It just has that single cell which divides itself and continues dividing itself so that it can grow into a more mature version of itself.
Okay, you're saying... Okay.
It's not that cell. It's a separate whole individual organism.
Okay, so you're saying the zygote, when it's one cell, that's not the zygote, but it is a zygote. Okay. I'm saying
that cell is not the zygote.
Okay, then what? Okay, straighten me out then, because I want to understand you. Because if I'm mistaken, I'll admit it. The zygote is not the cell, right? That's what you're saying. So what is the zygote then? Let the listeners know. If that zygote is not that cell with information, then please tell me what the zygote is, because everything I've read that the zygote is that one cell with information. But you're saying it's not. So please correct me and everyone else what the zygote is if it's not that cell with information. You're saying the zygote is not that cell with information. Please explain that.
Well, first let me ask you, you said everything you've read tells you the zygote is that cell with information. What have you been reading that's told you that?
All sites, all embryo sites, biologists, whatever. But no, go ahead. Just explain. No, if you're saying the zygote is not that cell with information, which I'm saying it is, and everything I read that says that the zygote is that cell with information, that single cell with information. You're saying it's not. Then what is the zygote?
Okay, before I answer it, I'd like to, can you give me any specific examples if you've been reading? If I gave you a couple of specific embryologists that I quoted.
No, just explain it. If you're saying that I'm wrong, if you're saying Brett Strong is wrong, that's fine. I would like you to verify that I'm wrong, and all I'm asking you is you to verify it. I don't need to bring up names and doctors. You explain to me and the listeners what is a zygote, because Brett Strong says in what he's learned that the zygote is that singular cell with information, right? You're saying it's not. So what is it?
Well, put simply, it's a human organism that is directing itself on a self-directed path of human development.
No, you're skipping. No.
It begins as a single cell, but that cell continues dividing so that it can grow.
Okay, stop right there. Then you just admitted that I was right. You just said in that little second speech that, yeah, it is a cell that divides. So what you're doing, you're mincing words because that zygote is the single cell, just as I knew it was, with information. You have to admit that. That's why you were saying, well...
I don't have to...
Yes, you do.
I don't have to admit that, and I didn't say that you were right. And I think if the listeners pay attention, I think they'll understand the difference.
What's the difference? Okay, let me ask you again. Just keep it nice and simple, Clinton Wilcox. If the zygote is not the single cell with the information. If it's not the single cell, then what is a zygote then?
As I just explained, the zygote is a unique individual human organism on a self-directed path of development.
No. See, but you're no, what you
the zygote itself is not that cell any more than I am the millions of cells that make up my body. The zygote is the organism that currently possesses one cell which divides and it allows it to grow because living beings grow through cellular reproduction.
Okay. Can you stop right there for a second? You just said the zygote is one cell that divides. You just said it, and that's what I've been saying. See, what you're doing, and I want everyone to know, is what you're doing right now is you're being ambiguous. You're equivocating on the word, the meaning of zygote. Because anyone would know that, because I studied it, the zygote, once it's split, it's no longer called the zygote. Some people call it the zygote, but it's not the zygote. The zygote is when the egg and the sperm come together and make a new organism. That thing right there is a single cell that divides. Once it divides, it's literally not the zygote. People call it the zygote still, but it divides, and at a certain point, it becomes a blastocyst, as you know. So so if we're going to talk about the zygote, which is this debate is about, then that zygote is a single cell. So I've been correct all the time, and you've been 100% wrong. Because any doctor would have to admit, yeah, that zygote is a cell with information, a single cell. Am I correct? So I think Brett Strong is proving Clinton Wilcox to be wrong on his expertise. Go ahead.
Okay, well, number one, I don't think you're proving me wrong. But number two, I should explain that I'm not an expert on the zygote. I don't have a medical degree, but I am well versed in the abortion issue, and so my statement should not be taken as gospel in the medical field because I'm not an expert on that. So, but I am well versed in the abortion issue itself, and so I just want to make that clear because I don't want to give anyone the wrong impression. But from the embryology textbooks I've seen, and from all the information I've seen, you're basically committing what's called the fallacy of composition. You're saying that because the zygote is made up of one cell, that the zygote is that one cell, and that's fallacious reasoning. The zygote is not that cell; it just has a cell which divides, which allows the zygote to grow and mature.
Okay, I'm gonna have to, like I said, I clearly see I got you on that one. Your point. I love you, Clinton Wilcox. You're a great guy. Can't wait to debate you in public. But I'm going to have to call your bluff on the zygote that you are 100% wrong. I'm looking up I'm on Bing Dictionary right now. It says zygote, fertilized ovum. That it's single cell. I mean, it's a single cell. Zygote is from the Greek. It's called yoked. Joined, egg and sperm joined. It's a single cell, and I think you really have to admit that Brett Strong has got you on that point that the zygote is a one cell, or it's one cell. Now, what you're doing is saying, what's that?
I said, yeah, it's a one-celled organism.
Okay, then you concede this whole. So this last 10 minutes, you concede to Brett Strong that I'm right and you're wrong. Because I've said the whole time it's one cell, and you started speaking over me saying, no, it's not one cell, it's this and that. I said, well, the information I found, that it is one cell with information. You can put all the information you want. I'll give you all the information, but it's one cell. So, I'm correct, and you're wrong.
Would realize that's not what happened.
What's that?
I think an honest listener would know that's not what happened. Because you seem to be saying that one cell itself is the zygote. But the problem is that the zygote is the human organism, which begins as a single cell. I don't know what the credentials are of that website that you're looking at, but I've been quoting from actual embryology textbooks. And secondly, for one thing, the term fertilized ovum is a misnomer, because once the sperm fertilizes the egg, it's no longer an ovum. It is an actual new, unique human organism. And that's what the embryology textbooks say.
Oh, I'm reading from straight from a dictionary on the internet. I'm looking at it right now, but they all say what I've said, that it's a cell, it's a single cell, and that's the point, that it is a single cell. All the information in the world, but it's a single cell, and I think you'd be honest to admit, okay, if you're gonna stick to that point, Brett Strong, you're right. The zygote is a single cell. Now, will you admit that? Will you admit that?
It's a single-celled organism.
Okay. I agree with you. Then we agree. Because it's a single cell. Absolutely. It's a single cell.
I don't think we actually agree though. That's just from listening to what both of us have been arguing. Because I'm saying that it's a single-celled organism, but that cell is not the zygote. The zygote has a single cell which divides. You seem to be saying that the zygote is that single cell.
Okay, yeah, the zygote is that single cell. How can the zygote not be the single cell when all there is that single cell? That cell, the egg and sperm come together to create a new entity. And that new entity is one cell called the zygote. Am I correct?
Okay, well, let me clarify to make sure I'm understanding of it. Are you saying that it's possible we've been saying the same thing, but it doesn't really sound like we have. Are you saying that the zygote is a single cell, no different than any of your other skin cells? Like if you cut yourself?
See, no. See,
with the razor shaving?
No, I'm not saying that, and I think that's where the confusion. Okay, let me explain to you Brett Strong's view of the zygote, which is the official zygote, which you would have to agree because that's what a zygote is the egg and sperm come together, they create a new entity. That entity is the zygote, and that entity is at that point one cell. And that's what I've been saying the whole time. That new entity is one cell that divides. And as one cell, it is not a human being because it doesn't have any trace of a brain, heart, lungs, liver, blood, bone, skin. It doesn't have any of that. So it's just a cell, a new entity. That new entity is one cell, and that's what I've been saying the whole time.
Okay, but see, it still sounds like there's a little confusion though, because the zygote is the organism. The zygote is not a cell that divides. The cell that divides is just a human cell, but the zygote itself is a single-celled organism that its cells reproduce and divide, and it grows into a more mature version of itself. So when you say that the zygote is a cell that divides, it's not technically correct.
Well, what I've seen and looked up, that once the zygote splits, it's officially no longer called the zygote. Some people call it the zygote still. But what I've looked at and studied, that once that single cell entity splits into 2, 4, 16, 32, 62, it's no longer the zygote. Like at some point, it's called the blastocyst. Am I correct? So it's not the zygote anymore. It's the blastocyst, and it keeps going, and embryo, fetus. Am I correct?
Right, but that doesn't really prove anything because, again, it's just stages of development.
But I know, but what I'm saying is the whole time I've said to Cody Nelson, I've said to you, Clinton Wilcox, the zygote is one cell. That's it. So we're talking about one cell. And that you have to agree that I've been right the whole time, that the zygote is one cell. And so that's what we're debating over, one cell. Is it a human being or not? And I'm showing that it's not a human being. It's just a cell with information. And once it's split, officially, it's not the zygote anymore, though people do call it the zygote. But it's a single-cell entity.
But again, we have to be clear on the implication, though, is that the zygote is not just a single cell like one of your ordinary skin cells. It's a human organism, and that's why it's valuable.
I agree. I agree with you on that.
If you cut yourself, shaving, and you bleed all over your sink, you haven't just committed mass homicide. But if you were to kill a zygote, you would be killing a human entity. Well,
I wouldn't say human entity, but I agree with you. And this is just common sense. Anyone listening to this would know. Like, obviously, the zygote, the single cell, is not a single cell that's in your arm or your scalp. I mean, that's just common sense. I mean, the zygote is egg, sperm, come together and create a new entity. And that entity is a single cell. Once it's split, officially, it's no longer called the zygote. But that single cell is the zygote. And that zygote is not a human being, has no trace of humanhood. Just like a car with a blueprint. I mean, a wheel with a blueprint or a brick with a blueprint is not a car or a home. Even if you want to put all the pieces of a car and put it in somebody's yard, all the pieces is not a car. You must put it together. Same thing with a home. Same thing with the zygote. It must put itself together, and at some point, it's called a human being. But at that beginning stage, it's not a human being. It's just a cell with information. A single cell entity.
Well, no, it is a human being. It's a biological member of our species. I mean,
not a human being, though.
Where the confusion lies is it sounds like you're confusing that cell with the zygote, because it keeps saying things like the zygote divides. Well, it doesn't. The cell divides, but the zygote itself is not dividing. Otherwise, Otherwise, instead of two-celled organism, you would have two one-celled organisms if the zygote itself was dividing.
Well, it's no longer called the zygote officially. Once the zygote splits, it's no longer called the zygote officially. That's why on the fourth or fifth day it's called the blastocyst. So I know what I'm saying, and I've been 100% correct this time. That we're debating the zygote. So we're debating a one-cell entity. That's it. One-cell entity. Once it's split, it's not the zygote officially, though some people do call it the zygote up into 3 or 4 days when it comes to blastocyst. But at the beginning stage, it's just a single cell entity called the zygote, and that single cell is not a human being. It's just a cell. And let me just add an example. And I did it to Cody Nelson, so I'm going to try it on you. To show that, to say that a zygote, a single cell entity, is a human being or person is really, really odd and quite strange, and I would say ridiculous, with all due respect to you, Clinton Wilcox. This is the example, and since you listen to the debate, you'll know. Imagine we had the technology. If we had the technology that at the moment the woman became pregnant, boom, egg, sperm, zygote. At that moment, imagine if we had the technology to know the woman was pregnant. So at that split moment, she's like, wow, I'm pregnant. I just got pregnant this moment, a second ago. Now, just say the next day she has her period, right? Now, just to show you how ridiculous and odd to call a zygote, a single cell entity, a human being or person, imagine if she took her tampon, her bloody tampon or bloody Kotex to the pastor and said, oh my God, my baby died. Just give me a second. The pastor or priest would say, what are you talking about? You're bringing a bloody tampon or Kotex talking about, your baby just died? And she was like, no, the zygote is a single cell entity and it died. It's dead. It's a human being. So I need to have a funeral. Don't you think the pastor or priest would sit there and look at her bloody tampon or Kotex saying there's a human being in there at a microscopic level called the zygote? They would say that is not a human being. Or even if they said it, they would say, okay, yeah, I agree, I'm a Christian, it's a human being, but a human being at that level, come on. I mean, no pastor or priest would bury a bloody Kotex or tampon that had a bloody zygote on it. And let me just finish. Imagine if the lady's like, well, no, I'm going to have a funeral anyway, invited people to the death of her child. And people were thinking, wow, your child died. Like, how old was the child? Oh, it was a zygote. It's microscopic. You can't see with the human eye. It's on my tampon. It's on my Kotex. Here's a little wooden box the size of a pin. We're going to go to church, have choir sing. The pastor's going to pray over this bloody tampon Kotex. And then we're going to get a limousine, and we're going to bury it 6 feet under. And then we're going to go eat dinner. All her friends would say, you know what, even if they said that the zygote was a human being, in reality, if that really came about, I think even Stephanie Gray would say, that's ridiculous. Burying a bloody tampon or Kotex with a microscopic zygote, saying it's a human being is one thing, what you're doing, but to put that in actuality, it looks ridiculous. So that's my point. To sit there and say, the zygote is a human being, yeah, it sounds fanciful and wonderful, but when you put that to reality, to actual situations, it looks utterly ridiculous, as I've shown.
Okay, see, now you're essentially making an argument from incredulity, which is fallacious reasoning, because just because something may seem ridiculous doesn't mean that it actually is, if there's a good argument to be made for it. And so it seems like you're really trying to compare intuitions here. And so my intuition would be that absolutely it's a human child. And so if she wants to have a funeral for it, I would say that we should honor it. I mean, there are women who miscarry and have funerals for their child who hadn't even left the fetus stage.
Oh, okay.
Pro-choice people think that's ridiculous, but I mean, to her, it was her child. She'd already bonded with it, and so she wants to have a burial for it. And I think that there's absolutely nothing wrong with that.
Okay, I want to ask you this question, and be honest, Clinton Wilcox. I guarantee you know of no woman who's buried a zygote or a embryo that's like only a month old. I guarantee you that you have no one. I guarantee you haven't met no woman who's actually buried an embryo even a month old. I guarantee it.
Well,
I guarantee it. Because that's how.
That's assuming every woman in my life would feel comfortable enough to tell me about that kind of thing. But again, I mean, it's kind of a ridiculous claim, though, because you're even talking about that we don't have the technology yet to determine when a zygote is, she's pregnant with the early, the early stages of pregnancy. And so, of course, I wouldn't know anyone who would have buried someone that early.
No, I said a month old. We have to, any woman tell you, of course, if a woman's been pregnant for a whole month, we can detect that. That's a given. I've got 2 kids myself. That's a given. And I guarantee you know of no... Okay, you know of no woman...
Which is why
but I also said... No, but I added I even gave you a couple weeks or even a month. I gave you that and said, do you know of any woman who's had a funeral? Because you said, hey, I know women who've had miscarried and have funerals. And I said, you know of no woman for a month.
I don't know them personally, but I have read accounts of them.
Okay, but I'm just saying, you know of no woman or heard of an account of a woman who miscarried after a month had a funeral. Because
no, I don't. But again, funerals are usually held for loved ones. And even if I would honor someone who wanted to have a funeral for a month-old embryo that died, it probably wouldn't happen because she didn't have a chance to bond with it, and so she wouldn't really feel the loss like she would another loved one. And so I thought anyone who lost an unborn child that early would actually want a funeral just because she didn't have the bonding experience with it.
Okay, so it's not the humanistic value, it's the bonding that matters then. Is that what you're saying? Are you starting to agree with Brett Strong now that the value really doesn't matter because you keep saying the bonding? So because think about it, if you're saying that the human being is a human being the same worth as you right now, Clinton Wilcox, that embryo at 1 month old has the same value as you, then why wouldn't a woman have a funeral, and why wouldn't a priest and pastor preach about it and have the choir singing and everyone dressed in black and hit the limousine and go 6 feet under? Why don't women who have miscarriages at a month or 2 months have these full, outright, open public displays of a funeral? How come? Because, I'll let you speak in a second. How come is because in theory what you're doing, like the zygote, the embryo, and these early, they're human beings, they have equal worth. It sounds good. It's like believing in Jesus flying in the air and disappearing through walls. Yeah, woo! But in actuality, science looks at Jesus and says, hey, that's fiction. In actuality, when you bury an embryo a month old, people just like, what, that's kind of ridiculous. I buy into all that feel good, embryo human, but in actuality, no one believes it. No one lives that way. Nobody worldviews accepts that. Outside of, even your own worldview wouldn't accept it, I would say.
Well, no, that's not true, and you're putting words into my mouth. I said that they're still valuable, and if a woman wanted to have a funeral from losing someone that early, we should honor it because they are human beings. I said that the reason that a woman probably wouldn't is because she didn't have a chance to bond with it yet, and so she wouldn't really have a desire to have a funeral with it because she doesn't feel the loss like she would, some other loved one that she's gotten a chance to know and bond with.
Okay, let me ask you a question then. Just say if I don't know if you're married or not, but just say your wife had a miscarriage. Hopefully, you'll have all the kids in the world, never a miscarriage. But just say your wife had a miscarriage at a month. And she's like, it's a miscarriage, it's in the toilet. Would you yourself say, well, I don't care how you feel about it, whether you bond or not, honey. I'm going to go in that toilet and scoop up that blood and that blood clot, and I'm going to my pastor or priest tomorrow, and we're going to have a funeral. I'm going to invite all my friends and my family and say, hey, my child just died. It's this blood clot right here, and I'm going to have a full-out funeral, cars with the lights on. If you did that, Clinton Wilcox, I guarantee you your own parents would look at you and say, son, you've lost your mind. And in theory, it's a human being, that embryo month old, and it has the worth. But in actuality, no one buys into that. So if you yourself did that, I guarantee you your own parents and your own parish would say, you know what, Clinton Wilcox, I think you took this a little bit too far. Son, let's have a cup of coffee and just forget about it and dump that blood clot in the toilet and let's go on and try again.
Okay, well, again, you're making an argument for incredulity here, but I think I'm going to want to jump back to a discussion about the brain, because what you're doing right now is you're trying to bring up increasingly more ridiculous scenarios in an attempt to try to embarrass me. I don't think that's a very honest tactic, because I've already given you my answers on this subject. If you don't accept them, that's fine. But I think that the discussion to be had about the unborn not having a brain just yet would be a valuable discussion to have.
Okay, hang on one second. Hey, you know what, Clinton Wilcox? I love you, man. I would never try to embarrass you. I'm just bringing up points to show you how when you take what you believe that the zygote and embryo at early stages of a human being, when you take that and put it into reality, it does look ridiculous. And I think you can understand that. And like I said, in theory, you're pro-life, and Stephanie Gray and Scott Klusendorf, it feels good, you know, like, wow, you know, yes, it's human, but I'm just showing that when you actually put that into actuality, it looks ridiculous, because it is ridiculous, because the zygote, it's not a human being, not a person. And if you just paid attention to your own common sense, it would tell you that. It was like, yeah, yeah, okay, you're right. Because if it was, it would make sense, because if you got buried, it would make sense. If I got buried or our kids got, it would make sense, because we're human beings. But to take a zygote or a bloody tampon or a blood clot embryo a month old, and say that's a human being? Come on. I think the ridiculous that you're complaining about, for me, shows within your own heart that I'm speaking truth, and that it's hard for you to accept it.
Well, no, it's not hard to accept it. It's just I've already answered your question, and you're just trying to bring up more and more extreme scenarios. And yeah, I've already answered your question. What more do you want from me?
No, okay, but they're not extreme.
So what I'm saying is that this line of conversation isn't exactly very helpful. So I think we should go back to talking about what it is about not having a brain that would not make something valuable. Okay,
that's fine. But what I will say is that the examples are not extreme. Women have miscarriages from 2 weeks, 3 weeks, a week out, a month out. So when you say that I'm saying extreme, that's not true, because I'm speaking reality. I'm not speaking scenarios that are like, come on, dude, that's just flying off the Jupiter. No, you and I both know, and Stephanie Gray, that women have miscarriages at all stages, from day 1, day 2, a week, 3 weeks, a month. We know this. So these scenarios are not outrageous. They're not far-fetched. They're everyday. Women across the world every day have a miscarriage from the zygote. They have a miscarriage from the blastocyst. They have a miscarriage from a month-old embryo. We know this. So what I'm saying to you is not just trying to embarrass you. These are real. These things happen all the time. But what I'm saying is to you is I think that you're upset maybe a little bit, because when you take your theories of embryo at month old or blood clot or zygote as being human, when you take that good feeling, like, yeah, I feel righteous and holy saying this, but when you take it into actuality, it looks ridiculous. And I think you're getting upset because I've shown that in reality, your stance does not hold water. It does look ridiculous, and it does look odd. It looks horrible, because your worldview does not stand up to reality. Your worldview stands up to
Actually, I'm not upset about it. I just think it's really bizarre, this line of reasoning that you're taking us down. But it's not that my view, is ridiculous in reality. I think my view is the stronger view, because I think that the arguments that the zygote is a valuable human being are much stronger than the arguments that it's not. And so your line of reasoning here is fallacious for two reasons. And number one, it's an argument from incredulity, not because you think it's ridiculous, therefore it's wrong. That's fallacious reasoning. But number two, even if I was hypocritical, even if I didn't want to have a funeral for even a human fetus lost at 9 months, that would not argue against my position that the unborn are valuable human beings. That would just mean that maybe I don't take it seriously, or maybe I'm a hypocrite, but that doesn't prove that my arguments are wrong. So this whole line of reasoning is really just a red herring. It doesn't even really matter in the grand scheme of the abortion issue.
You know what? I would differ, and I totally disagree with you that these examples are legitimate, and they're firm, and they do show the utter ridiculous of pro-lifers saying that a zygote or a month-old embryo is a blood clot is a human being. And so I have to take the opposite position, that you're absolutely wrong on this point, and the ridiculous of taking your worldview and putting your worldview into reality. And when you put it to reality, it looks ridiculous, because it does, because the worldview it's not a right worldview. It's a worldview based on theory and good feelings. But when you take that out of the theory, good feeling, and put it to reality, it looks ridiculous, and that ridiculous shows that your point is false. So I totally disagree with you, and that's fine. We'll agree to disagree. But I guarantee you, if you had a zygote, and your wife or girlfriend had a miscarriage, I guarantee you, your own parents would say, if you want a full out funeral, I guarantee you, your priest, pastor, probably even the girl who had it would say, this is ridiculous, Clinton Wilcox. I mean, and that to me shows that yeah, your point is invalid, and it should be reconsidered on your behalf. But let's move on real quick, because we're getting down to, I wanted to do an hour, and so we're getting down to 8 minutes. So let's do the whole hour, 8 minutes, and we'll finish up. So what do you want to say in these 8 minutes?
Well, I mean, you brought up the point earlier about how the zygote doesn't have a brain or anything like that, so I'd like to just touch on that real quick. And I'd also like to reiterate that you haven't addressed my argument about the substance view, the future value, or why, that the unborn are people because of their inherent nature. But regarding the lack of brain, that doesn't affect who the unborn is. I forget who did it, but there's a pro-life philosopher who actually compared, for example, an anencephalic baby, which is basically a child born without a brain, compared them to a gunshot victim, someone that shoots them in the head, and so that there's no way to save them, but we still afford them dignity. We keep them in a hospital bed, we keep them comfortable until they die. And so an anencephalic infant can be seen as similar to a gunshot victim. The anencephalic baby still has value, intrinsic value, as a human being, even though it's not going to live very long after birth. It's still something that has intrinsic value, just like the gunshot victim does.
Okay, you know what? A baby with no brain. If you want to say it has intrinsic value, I would not argue that. Brett Strong wouldn't argue that one. I give it to you, because I would think that, hey, man, if I had a child with no brain, I would be hurt and sad and feeling the pain. So yeah, I would give it value. I never said that a child with no brain didn't have any intrinsic value. So no, I totally agree with that. That makes perfect sense. A baby born with no brain, yes, it's going to have value. It's going to cause a lot of pain and sorrow amongst the parents. So yeah, I agree with that. So we're in total agreement on that one. But you had another point. What was the point? The future point that Cody Nelson made. What was that? The future point?
The future value. Like, why it's wrong to kill us is because you're robbing us of all of our future experiences, future valuable experiences. And the zygote, if you kill a zygote, this is assuming we can kill a zygote. When abortions are done, the zygote is much later, but we're focusing on the zygote here. If you were to kill the zygote, it being a member of our species and being ontologically the same entity that it will be, 12 years down the line, you are robbing the zygote of his or her, it's still a gender because of its DNA, but you're robbing the zygote of his or her future experiences of value.
Okay, yeah, that's what Cody Nelson, and I didn't quite get it with him, and I don't quite get it with you. I don't quite get that argument, because the zygote as a single cell entity is just a single cell information. So, as you know, up to 75% of all pregnancies are miscarried, aborted by the body. So, to add a intrinsic value future argument, I don't agree. The zygote doesn't have a intrinsic value or future until it has to prove itself. It has to. It's like a lion, an alpha male lion. It has to prove itself before it can take over a pride. It just can't walk up and say, "Well, I'm taking you guys over." It has to muscle itself. It has to prove itself, and the zygote has to prove itself. It has to become something before it can make any rights on a future being married, whatever. It has to get to a certain point, and the body aborting up to 75% of them, to me, shows that there is a proving system, a vetting system, and that zygote has to get past that vetting system in order to even make a claim to that. So just like the alpha male lion must prove itself, the zygote too. And until it does, like I told Cody Ness, I'll tell you, Clinton Wilcox, if you today remain a zygote your entire life, you would have no worth. Even your parents would say at the end of the day, if you were just a zygote, or you return to a zygote and stayed a zygote, you would have no intrinsic worth, and your parents would discard you and move on without you. Because as a zygote, so I don't get the whole future experience thing, because it's just a zygote. And I told Cody Nelson, I'll tell you, if you stayed a zygote, Clinton Wilcox, even your parents would forget about you. You wouldn't have a wife. You would have nothing. All that came about because you went through the vetting system, and at some point you claim that futurehood. So I don't get that argument. Go ahead.
Okay, because here's the thing, is that you might as well argue that if you remain a baby your entire life, you'll have no value to humanity. So babies don't have intrinsic value. That's just not a very good argument.
No.
That's the logical extension of your views.
No.
The reason that a zygote is valuable in the first place is because it's a member of the human species. It's intrinsically valuable because of its inherent nature as a rational moral agent, just like the baby is.
No. If you stayed a baby your whole life, the zygote. We said this in the beginning. The zygote, one cell entity, is not a baby. A baby has all organs, it's flesh, bones, breathing, is looking at you, goo goo gaga. Zygote does not have any of that. So you're making a fallacious comparison between a one cell entity versus a baby.
Well, no, it's not a false analogy. I'm making the analogy because if you're just going to say, because it's not the sum total of your body parts that makes you valuable to society. It's your ability to reason, your ability to contribute in some way. And so if you're going to say if you remain a zygote your whole life, you'd be worthless to society. Well, that's true of a baby too. If you were to remain a baby,
okay.
Society because you can't contribute in any meaningful way.
I disagree, because as a baby, if you have a newborn baby, even if that baby stayed a baby, parents would love it, like, oh, that's my baby. You see parents with babies, yeah, of course they want the baby to grow up and be strong, whatever. But people get excited about babies, and I can imagine there's people around the world like, hey, if my child's, matter of fact, I've heard women say all the time, like, oh, I wish my kid would just stay a baby. I love them when they were just a newborn. I love that stuff, goo goo gaga. So I've heard many women like, oh man, I wish they would stay that beautiful goo goo gaga stay. So I disagree with you. But no one would say that about a zygote. Oh, I wish you would stay a zygote. I wish you would say a single cell entity.
I know. Okay, but if a woman could determine that she's pregnant that early, I know many women who would be excited that she had, a zygote / embryo implanting inside her because she's looking forward to having that baby. So it's not a false analogy. I'm just showing that it's not really a strong argument, because either way you wouldn't be able to contribute to society. And so to get back to the future value argument, there's really no vetting period. See, you're confusing natural rights with legal rights. And I know we're talking about lions here, and they don't really have rights as we understand them. But the problem is that the lion is trying to accomplish some kind of feat. He wants to become the king of the lion. That's like becoming president. In order to become president, there are certain conditions you have to satisfy. You have to be 35 years old. You have to be an American-born or naturalized citizen, etc. And so that's a legal right. That's something that society establishes as a right. But then there are natural rights, which you don't acquire by coming into them or by maturing enough. You just have them by virtue of being a human being. We have natural rights, which are established in our Bill of Rights in the United States. And so there's really no vetting period. You don't have to go through some kind of process to see if you're worthy for life. Just because a woman miscarries or has a chance of miscarriage, that doesn't justify us killing someone intentionally. And by extension, everyone dies. They just die at different points. And so you might as well say that babies don't have intrinsic value because they might die of SIDS, sudden infant death syndrome. And so they have to make it past that point before we can say that they're really valuable. Or that they really have a future record, because even though zygote has a chance of miscarrying, they still have a possible future, and it's that possible future that we can't rob from them intentionally. Just because because I'm probably going to die when I'm 70 or 80, which is the average death of a male in the United States. Just because I'm probably going to die when I'm 75 doesn't mean that I don't have a future now. And just because zygote has a chance of miscarrying doesn't mean that it doesn't also have a future.
But
yeah, and I should apply that to the infant too. That just because an infant has a chance of dying with sudden infant death syndrome doesn't mean that infants don't have futures just because they have that chance.
Put that in a quicker nutshell. I want to attack that point and then we'll finish it. Just put that in a blunt nutshell, and I want to attack that point, and we'll make that point, this point, the final point for this one. Okay?
Which point are you talking about? Future value?
Yeah. Put that in a more simplistic nutshell. I'll attack it, and then I'll give you the last word.
All right, I'm not sure how much simpler I can make it, but essentially, what accounts for the wrongness of killing a human being, someone, for example, someone outside the womb, is that you're robbing them of all of their future experiences of value. For example, having sex, getting married, eating good food, traveling, those kinds of things. And so, the human zygote, since it is also a member of our species, you are robbing them of a future value because they have the same future valuable experiences that we do. They just have, more of it than we do. In fact, that also accounts for why many people consider it more of a tragedy when children die than when the elderly die, because they have more of their lives ahead of them.
Well, I just wanted you to restate it so I can, make sure that I'm understanding you. And I'm gonna just have to totally disagree with you on that. The zygote embryo must go through a vetting system. It must be vetted out. The weak, you know what? That's the way nature is. Like in the jungle, in the wild, the strong survive, and the weak just get tossed to the side and eaten. The world is for the strong, Cody. I mean, I keep calling Cody now, so Clinton Wilcox. The world is for the strong, and in everything in life, there's a vetting system. Even when a man gets married, she vets him out. And he vets her out. There's a vetting system for marriage. To get a job, you get vetted out. Do you have a degree? This one requires a PhD. And if you don't have a PhD, you cannot get this job. We know this. It's the same thing with the zygote. It must go through a vetting system. It must be vetted out, and if it doesn't make that vetting, it has no worth. Like to a company, if a company says, "Well, you got to have a PhD, Clinton Wilcox." Period. Well, until you get that PhD, guess what, Clinton Wilcox? You have no worth to that company. We both agree. You have no worth until you get to a certain point. Just like a woman, some women will not take a homeless guy as a husband. She was like, no, you have no value to me as a husband until you get to a certain point. Same thing with a zygote. It has no worth until it gets to a certain point. Because if a zygote stayed a zygote, it's no worth to anyone. It's like if you went back to that same job scenario that demanded a PhD. As long as you didn't get your PhD, you would have no value to that company. 100 years from now, no PhD, Clinton Wilcox. Well, you have no worth to this company. The zygote must go through that same vetting. It must build itself up to a point where it is valuable, able to contribute, and has a future. But it must pass a vetting system before it can even claim it go after a future. Because in the zygote stage, there is no future. There is no personhood. There is no human. It must go through a vetting system. Everything in life must go through it. And if the zygote does not make it through, it gets aborted. If it stays the same, it's no good or no worth, not even to the mom. The mom would have to say at the end of the day, you know what, it stayed a zygote. And therefore, a year later, the zygote has no worth. I'm over it. I was excited, but it stayed a zygote. And even the mom would say, yeah, I'm over it. Let's move on. And so, in matter of fact, I'm going to make this my final point, my final speech, and I'm going to give you the last word, okay? So, just to finish it on that, like I said, to make a clear analogy, that if you, Clinton Wilcox, went to a company that demanded a PhD, like if you wanted to be a professor at Harvard or Yale, you would have to have a PhD. And if you didn't, they would say, hey, 100 years from now, Clinton Wilcox, if you don't have a PhD, you still have no worth to this company. You still have no worth in this sphere. And I say the same thing about the zygote. Until it gets to a certain point where it can even claim, and that certain point has to have a brain, has to have a heart, it has to have organs, it has to have blood, skin, it has to do all that within itself before it can even claim a futurehood. So that's why I reject your futurehood. I reject your human value. I reject all that, because when you take everything you said today in this debate, take it all, when you put it in reality, it doesn't work. All your, for all your theories of it's a human being, the zygote, it's a person, it has a future, and all these, you know what, Clinton Wilcox, this is my final speech, so I'm gonna just finish up. I will say to you, yeah, all your grandiose, beautiful accolades on the zygote, it's beautiful, it's very warming, like I'm sitting next to a fire. But when you take that out of this, your theory zone and put it into reality, everything I'm showing tonight, that your beautiful accolades does not hold up in reality. It doesn't. It's like taking Jesus, and saying, "Oh, he disappeared through the wall, he flew in the air, he walked on water." That's heartwarming. That's beautiful. But you take that to science, and science goes, "That's a bunch of crock. No one can disappear through walls and fly in the air and walk on water. That is fiction, my son." So take that back to academia, take it to church, but in reality, those good things don't work. So I'm going to end it right there, that the zygote is not a human being. It is not a person. It's just a one-cell entity. And until it goes through a vetting process, until it builds us up to a certain point, it has no worth. It's like a house or a car. A car, whether you have all the pieces in the yard or just a wheel and a blueprint, it has no worth until you put that car together and build it up. Same thing with a home. A brick and a blueprint or all the pieces of a house in a front yard has no intrinsic worth until you put it together and make it into a house. Build it up. And at some point, building up the car, the home, and the human being, it does have that worth in that future. But until then, it's nothing. And that's Brett Strong, and I'm not going to say anything. And Clinton Wilcox, has been a pleasure debating you. And if I offended you in any manner, please forgive me. And I'm going to give you the complete last word, and we're going to end on you, Clinton Wilcox. So thank you very much for being here tonight. And there you go. Oh? Hello? We've lost our caller.